Hi, class. Can you believe it? We are almost to week 3. And so I wanted to send you your video before the weekend hit for a couple of reasons. And so as we get into week 3, you're still working on your 72-hour food diary. And so you definitely want to be planning how you're going to answer those questions and planning when you're going to record your food for 3 days and getting yourself set up for that. You're just now finishing understanding research and kind of looking at a scientific approach when it comes to nutrition. And now we are going to get into the beginnings of recommendations. And so there's something I want to point out to you right away. And this will start now every single week. You will notice that this Learn Smart is due this Sunday. Your Learn Smart is always going to be due at the beginning of the week. And there's a reason for that. Your Learn Smart's due at the beginning of the week, so you are prepared to take on the week and do the activities and assignments that are associated with that chapter. And so please take a close look at that, because even though you won't see it in week 2, you'll be ready to recognize that it is actually due this Sunday. As we go into week 3, you're going to start to see some of how I'll structure your weekly folders. And so again, we always start out with our learning objectives. Great way to test yourself on the material. In addition, these chapters will now have content folders. And this is where I will put a PowerPoint lecture, where I'll put any videos either that I make in creating lectures for you, or I'll utilize videos that I find on YouTube, the web, and so on, because I always want it to be a little bit different, because heaven forbid things should not get boring when we talk about food. So this week you can see that you have, okay, so the video is not as corny as it looks like when you just look at this front screen, but I will tell you it was made by the government, and what can I say about something made by the government? It's definitely on the corny side, but it's a good video. I think it'll super help you with learning to read labels and a lot of the content in chapter 2. And so you'll always have this now, that I'll always do this chapter 2 content, or I'll always do a weekly content folder. And then this week, typically you have your Learn Smart due this Sunday, and then you have your activity. And again, you're also working on your 72-hour food diary. And so when you are learning about the daily reference intakes, and please know that you do not need to memorize any of the intake amounts. And so I'm never going to go back necessarily and test you on how much vitamin C you might need. What you do need to know, pen and paper kids, is that you need to know calories per gram. You need to know the ranges with which we need to eat foods. For example, carbohydrates should be 45 to 65% of our entire diet, right? Protein is 10 to 35%, and so on. And so that a little bit is in chapter 2 and a little bit is in chapter 1. You need to understand what the daily reference intake is. And so when we talk about different types of guidelines that are put out by the FDA, you need to know what those guidelines are defined as, not how you need to apply them. And because you're going to get hit with a lot of numbers, and I actually don't think that's super useful information, because you can always look that up. What I do find useful is understanding that information in reference to reading a food label, that information in reference to how much minerals you should be taking in. For example, like sodium is a really good example, because we need to watch our intake of sodium, as we find a large quantity of it inside processed foods. We really need to understand developing an eating plan that evaluates nutrient density versus energy density. Nutrient being those essential vitamins and minerals and phytochemicals and all that we get in food. And then the energy density is that the amount of calories contained in that food. We know like a fat, for example, is the most energy dense. Sometimes nutrient density and energy density go together, and avocado is a great example of that. Super nutrient dense, but also energy dense. And then we have a lot of foods that don't fall into the same categories, like Doritos. Doritos super energy dense. I don't think they had a nutrient in them to save their life. So kind of learning how to balance that. I am not going to go back and test you on my plate. You'll come to find that I'm not necessarily the hugest fan of government recommendations. I think they fall short of what the science shows us, but I do believe they're a great place to start. And so I'm not going to necessarily test you on my plate, but you should understand what your plate should consist of. Right. And so you can't just look at a carbohydrate and think that's just a bagel. We need to know that kale and bagel are both carbohydrates, right? But we don't treat them equally because certainly kale is going to be far more nutrient dense than a bagel. And so when we talk about that 45 to 65% of our total calories, we can't fill it with bagel because we need to include the fruits and the vegetables and the legumes and all of that in that category. And so that's kind of the overarching view when you talk about my plate. I wanted to highlight those couple of points to you so you don't get bogged down in the minutia and you really get some of those bigger concepts. When you get into this chapter 2 activity, that's where we'll highlight some of understanding how we're defining these different FDA style recommendations. Okay, I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you over the course of the weekend and next week. And please let me know if you have questions.